I woke up gasping for air, my lungs burning as if I'd been underwater too long. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains. No, not unfamiliar, forgotten. The pale blue silk drapes of my childhood bedroom at Sinclair Manor hung exactly as they had years ago. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrambled upright. The last thing I remembered was the sickening crunch of metal, the heat of flames licking at my skin, and the bitter realization that I had been betrayed by everyone I loved. I had been dying at 26. Now I was, where? When? My gaze fell on the ornate calendar on my nightstand, March 15th, 7 years in the past, the day before my engagement announcement to Damien Blackwell. Impossible, I whispered, my voice sounding younger, smoother than I remembered. I threw back the covers and rushed to the full-length mirror across the room. The face that stared back at me wasn't the hardened woman I'd become. This face was softer, unmarked by the years of betrayal and heartbreak that had carved themselves into my features. 19-year-old Evelyn Sinclair looked back at me, her green eyes wide with shock. My hands trembled as I touched my cheek, real, solid. I pinched myself hard enough to leave a mark. "I've been given a second chance," I said to my reflection, barely believing the words. A gentle knock at the door made me jump. "Miss Evelyn, are you awake?" Victoria's familiar voice called through the door. Victoria, my loyal maid who had stood by me even as my world collapsed. In my past life, she had been one of the few who hadn't betrayed me. "Come in," I called, struggling to keep my voice steady. Victoria entered carrying a breakfast tray, her warm smile exactly as I remembered it. "Good morning, miss. Your father asked me to remind you about the dinner preparations tonight. The florist called about the arrangements for tomorrow's announcement. Tomorrow's announcement, my engagement to Damien Blackwell, the beginning of the end in my previous life." "Thank you, Victoria," I said, my throat tight with emotion at seeing her again. She set the tray down and looked at me with concern. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about tomorrow, I suppose." "That's understandable. It's not every day a young lady gets engaged to one of New York's most eligible bachelors." She poured me a cup of tea exactly how I liked it. 1 sugar, splash of milk. "Though if you don't mind my saying, you've seemed distant since the negotiations began." Negotiations. That's all it had been. A business arrangement between families that had ended with me dead and the Sinclair fortune gone. "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just contemplating the future." A future I now had the chance to rewrite. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, my stomach dropping when I saw the name flashing on the screen. Celeste Moore, my best friend, my betrayer. 3 text messages from her. "Evie, lunch at Bellini's today? Need to talk wedding colors. I vote blue for your engagement dress tomorrow. Brings out your eyes. Hey sleepyhead, text me back. I'm dying to hear if you've seen the ring yet." My fingers tightened around the phone. In my previous life, I had trusted her completely, never suspecting that she and my father were orchestrating my downfall together. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Miss?" Victoria was watching me with concern. "It's just Celeste," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Making plans for lunch?" I typed a quick reply, careful to match the enthusiastic tone the old Evelyn would have used. "Just woke up. Lunch sounds perfect. Meet you at 1? "Will you need help selecting an outfit for your lunch date?" Victoria asked. "No, thank you. I think I'll dress myself today." I needed time alone to think, to plan. "Actually, Victoria, could you check if my father left the quarterly reports in his study? He promised I could review them." In my previous life, I had shown no interest in the family business until it was too late. Not this time. "Of course, Miss Evelyn." Victoria looked surprised but pleased. "I'll bring them to you right away." After she left, I ate mechanically, my mind racing. The engagement to Damien had been presented as a merger of equals, the old money Sinclair fortune joining with the Blackwell empire. I had later discovered it was a calculated move by my father to hide massive embezzlement and corporate sabotage. Victoria returned with a leather portfolio. "Your father's assistant was reluctant, but I told her you were taking a more active interest in the company." "Thank you, Victoria. That will be all for now." Once alone, I spread the documents across my desk. The Sinclair Holdings financial statements looked legitimate at first glance, but I knew what to look for now. The discrepancies were subtle. Company assets overvalued, liabilities hidden in subsidiary accounts, money flowing through offshore entities with innocuous names. After an hour of searching, My eyes burned from strain. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The evidence was there, but scattered and disguised. I would need time to piece it together. My gaze fell on the bottom drawer of my desk, where I kept personal mementos. Acting on a long-forgotten memory, I pulled it open and pushed aside old birthday cards and photographs. At the back was a slim leather-bound journal with a small lock, my mother's journal. Eleanor Sinclair had died when I was 16. A boating accident, they'd said. Too much champagne, a slippery deck, no witnesses. I had never questioned it. Until now. I turned the journal over in my hands. The lock was simple but effective. I had no key, and breaking it would be noticeable. I slipped the journal into my handbag, knowing I needed to find the key before anyone realized I had it. At noon, I dressed for lunch with Celeste, choosing a simple white blouse and navy skirt rather than the fashionable dress I would have worn in my previous life. I applied minimal makeup, studying my younger face. The woman who had died at 26 had been beaten down by betrayal and loss. This time would be different. Lunch with Celeste was an exercise in restraint. Every smile, every laugh from her sent ice through my veins. I watched her closely. Her perfect blonde curls, bright blue eyes that projected warmth, but never quite felt it. Had the signs always been there? Earth to Evie. Celeste waved her hand in front of my face. You're a million miles away. I blinked, forcing myself back to the present. Sorry, pre-engagement jitters. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Her concern seemed genuine, but I now caught the calculation behind it. Your father would have a coronary. No second thoughts, I said carefully. Just wondering what married life with Damien Blackwell will be like. Cold, probably, Celeste snickered. That man has the emotional range of a glacier, but he's gorgeous and loaded, so there's that. In my previous life, I had laughed with her at Damien's expense. I had believed her assessment of him as cold and cruel. I had never suspected that she had helped orchestrate the match to facilitate my father's schemes. He's more complex than people give him credit for, I said. Celeste raised an eyebrow. Since when are you his defender? I shrugged, just trying to look on the bright side. The rest of lunch passed in a blur of wedding talk and society gossip. I nodded and smiled in all the right places while mentally cataloging every inconsistency in her behavior, every subtle probe about my father's business dealings disguised as casual conversation. When I returned home, my father was in his study, phone pressed to his ear. Richard Sinclair, tall, distinguished, silver-streaked dark hair and shrewd blue eyes that never missed a detail. The sight of him sent a wave of complicated emotions through me. In my previous life, I had discovered his betrayal only at the end, when it was too late. He saw me lingering in the doorway and motioned me in, wrapping up his call. Evelyn, he said, his voice warm with practiced affection. How was lunch with Celeste? Lovely, I lied. We discussed tomorrow's announcement. Good, good. He straightened some papers on his desk. The Blackwells confirmed they'll arrive by 7. Damien sent over a gift for you. It's on your dressing table. How thoughtful, I said, wondering what calculated gesture my future fiancé had made this time. My father studied me, head tilted. You seem different today. I tensed. Different how? More present? He narrowed his eyes slightly. Victoria mentioned you asked for the quarterly reports. I thought it was time I took more interest in the family business, I said carefully, especially with the Blackwell merger approaching. Something flickered across his face, surprise, followed by what might have been approval. That's an unexpected but welcome development. Perhaps you could join me for the board meeting next week. I'd like that, I said, knowing it would give me access to information I hadn't had before. Remember, he said, his tone shifting to the authoritative one I knew well. This alliance with the Blackwells is crucial for our future. Some of our recent ventures haven't performed as projected. Translation: we need their money and influence to cover up our financial crimes. I understand the importance, I assured him. Evening arrived, and with it, dinner in the formal dining room. In my previous life, I had picked at my food, anxious about the impending engagement. Tonight I sat straight-backed in my chair, watching my father with new eyes, as he detailed the schedule for tomorrow's announcement. The press release goes out at noon, he said, cutting into his steak. The Blackwells have arranged for coverage in all the major financial publications. This merger will make headlines. And what exactly does Damien think of this arrangement? I asked. a question I had never dared pose before. My father paused, fork halfway to his mouth. He understands the benefits to both families. The Blackwells gain our social standing and historical significance. We gain their expanded market reach. He studied me. Why do you ask? Just curious if my future husband is as enthusiastic about this match as everyone else seems to be. Damien Blackwell isn't known for enthusiasm, my father said with a small laugh. But he's agreed to the terms. That's what matters. I took a sip of water. And what are those terms exactly? Another surprised look. Since when are you interested in contract details? Since I'm the one getting married, I replied evenly. My father set down his fork. The details are complex, Evelyn. The important thing for you to know is that this union secures your future and the future of Sinclair Holdings. Just as evasive as I remembered. But this time, I knew what he was hiding. As dinner concluded, I excused myself to prepare for tomorrow. In my room, I found the small velvet box Damien had sent. Inside was an enormous diamond engagement ring, cold and impersonal. In my previous life, I had been dazzled by it. Now I saw it for what it was, a business expense, a prop in our charade. I closed the box without trying it on and turned instead to my mother's journal, running my fingers over the lock. My mother had discovered something before she died, something worth hiding. I needed to find the key. From my window, I could see the lights of Manhattan sparkling in the distance. Tomorrow, I would stand beside Damien Blackwell and smile for the cameras, playing my part in this farce of an engagement. But this time, I would be playing by my own rules. I turned away from the window, a cold determination settling in my chest. 7 years ago, I had been a pawn in their game. This time, I would be the player. The Blackwell Estate ballroom dazzled under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. Every surface gleamed with old money and careful preservation. Champagne flowed freely as New York's elite mingled, their laughter rising to the high ceilings. I stood at the entrance, one hand smoothing down the rich crimson fabric of my gown. In the corner of my eye, I caught Victoria's small nod of approval. She'd been surprised when I'd dismissed the blue dress my father had pre-selected the same demure, forgettable gown I'd worn to announce my engagement in my previous life. Tonight, I wanted to be seen. "Miss Sinclair, you look stunning," said Bradford Wellington, one of my father's oldest business associates. Though quite the bold choice for an engagement party. "Thank you," I replied. "I thought it was time for something new." I scanned the room, nodding politely to familiar faces while tracking the whispers that followed in my wake. The crimson dress had achieved its purpose. People were watching, wondering what had changed about the usually compliant Evelyn Sinclair. The crowd parted slightly as Damien Blackwell entered from the opposite side of the ballroom. Even across the distance, his presence commanded attention. Tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored black suit, he moved with the confidence of a man who never questioned his place in the world. My heart stuttered in my chest. In my past life, I had mistaken his severe expression and watchful eyes for cold disdain. Now I noticed the careful way he surveyed the room, the subtle tension in his shoulders. He wasn't cold, he was vigilant. As if to confirm my thoughts, I watched as he smoothly intercepted Harold Winters, a hostile Blackwell board member who had been making his way toward me with a determined scowl. Damien's hand clasped the older man's shoulder, redirecting him toward a group of investors with such natural grace that few would have recognized the deliberate intervention. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't look away as I might have before. Instead, I held his gaze steadily until something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, at this small rebellion against our choreographed roles. The orchestra began to play, signaling the time for our obligatory first dance. We moved toward each other, meeting in the center of the cleared floor as flashbulbs popped around us. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. He took my hand, his touch warm and firm. "Mr. Blackwell," I replied, stepping into his embrace as we began to move. His hand at my waist was steady, leading me with unexpected grace for a man of his size. I deliberately stepped closer than propriety allowed, eliminating the formal distance between us. His eyes widened slightly at the breach of protocol. "Red becomes you," he said quietly, "though your father seemed displeased with your choice." "My father's preferences no longer dictate my wardrobe," I replied. We turned in perfect synchronization as the music swelled. I felt the heat of his palm through the thin fabric at my waist. the subtle pressure of his fingers as he guided our movements. "I know more than you think, Damien," I whispered, keeping my expression pleasantly neutral for the watching crowd. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on my waist, but his face betrayed nothing. "Is that so, Miss Sinclair?" "I believe we're engaged now. You might call me Evelyn." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Evelyn, then." The music ended, and we separated with practiced bows to polite applause. As we walked off the dance floor, Damien leaned closer to speak privately. "You're different tonight," I smiled. "Perhaps you're simply noticing me for the first time." Before he could respond, my father appeared, claiming Damien for urgent business discussions with a group of silver-haired men in the corner. I watched them go, noting how my father's hand clapped Damien's shoulder with false camaraderie. The party continued around me. I accepted congratulations and deflected intrusive questions about wedding plans with practiced ease. Yet beneath the social mask, my mind worked frantically to process everything I was seeing with new eyes. An hour later, I slipped away from a tedious conversation about floral arrangements with Mrs. Harrington, claiming a need for fresh air. Instead, I found myself drawn to the darkened hallway leading to the more private areas of the Blackwell estate. Voices drifted from behind a partially open door, the library, based on the brief glimpse of leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves. I slowed my steps, listening. "The merger papers are almost ready," my father's voice confident and smug. "Once she signs after the wedding, the Sinclair assets transfer directly to us." A familiar feminine laugh followed. "Celeste. And Evelyn suspects nothing?" "She's always been happily oblivious to business matters," my father replied. "The girl thinks this is about joining two great families. By the time she realizes what's happened, it will be too late to stop it." I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding in my chest. Even knowing what I did from my previous life, hearing the naked contempt in my father's voice cut deep. "And Damien?" Celeste asked. "Let me worry about Blackwell. He's got his own reasons for this arrangement. As long as those reasons keep him compliant, we'll proceed as planned." I forced myself to move away before they emerged, my mind racing with questions. What were Damien's reasons? In my previous life, I'd never questioned the arrangement, accepting it as a business decision between families. Now every assumption felt dangerous. As I rounded the corner back toward the main hallway, I nearly collided with a familiar figure. "Julian?" I whispered, shocked despite myself. Julian Hart smiled, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners just as I remembered. In my previous life, he had disappeared shortly after my engagement, sending only a brief note of congratulations before vanishing to Europe. Finding him here, now, sent a chill down my spine, despite his warm expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Evie." He offered me one of the champagne flutes he carried. I took it automatically, studying his face. Julian had been my friend since childhood, the artistic soul among our privileged set. Had he been part of the conspiracy all along? The future I remembered suggested yes, but here he stood, seemingly unchanged from the boy I'd trusted. "I didn't expect to see you tonight," I said carefully. "I wouldn't miss your engagement, though I must say the crimson is unexpected." He gestured to my dress. "Bold choice. People keep saying that, because the Evelyn Sinclair we know tends to play it safe." His smile turned knowing. "Something's different about you tonight." I sipped the champagne to avoid answering immediately. "How long will you be in town?" "Indefinitely, as it happens. I've taken a consulting position with your father's company. Didn't he mention it?" My father had said nothing about Julian's return or his employment. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle I'd missed before. "How interesting," I managed. "In what capacity?" "Creative direction for the new joint ventures with Blackwell Industries." He leaned closer, his familiar scent bringing unwanted memories of trust and friendship. "We should catch up properly. Lunch tomorrow?" Before I could answer, Celeste appeared in the hallway, her blue dress catching the light as she moved toward us. "There you are," she exclaimed, looping her arm through mine possessively. "Everyone's looking for you. The caterers want to know when to bring out the engagement cake." I extracted myself from her grip with more force than necessary. I needed a moment of quiet. Celeste's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly at my tone. "Well, your moment's over. Society page photographers are waiting." I returned to the ballroom, playing my part through the cake cutting and toasts that followed. All the while, I tracked the movements of those around me with new vigilance. My father's confident networking, Celeste's calculated attentiveness, Julian's careful observations from the periphery. As the evening drew to a close, I escaped to the terrace, needing genuine fresh air and a moment to collect my thoughts. The spring night was cool, the gardens below shrouded in darkness, broken only by strategic landscape lighting that illuminated stone paths and flowering trees. "Running away from your own engagement party?" Damien's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from inside. He stepped forward, joining me at the stone balustrade. "Just taking a moment," I said. "You've been taking quite a few moments tonight." He studied my face with unnerving intensity. "First the dress, then your behavior during our dance, now this disappearing act. Perhaps I'm not the docile fiancé everyone expected." His mouth quirked. "I never expected docile, Miss Sinclair." "Didn't you?" I challenged. "Isn't that exactly what this arrangement called for? A compliant wife who wouldn't ask questions?" Something flickered in his dark eyes, surprise perhaps, or reassessment. He placed his hands on the stone railing, his shoulder nearly touching mine as he gazed out over the gardens. "Whatever game you're playing, Miss Sinclair," he said quietly, "remember that not everything is as it appears." I turned to face him fully. "Including you?" His expression remained impassive, but I caught the slight tension in his jaw. "Especially me." The French doors behind us opened, spilling light and noise onto the terrace as guests began to depart. The moment of privacy shattered as Celeste called my name, her voice carrying the false warmth I now recognized all too well. Damien straightened, resuming his public persona. "Thank you for the dance, Evelyn," he said formally, loud enough for others to hear. Then, in a whisper meant only for me, "Be careful who you trust." He walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers as I turned to face the remaining party guests. One thing was certain. This engagement was far more complicated than I had ever understood, even with the knowledge of my previous life. The glass and steel Sinclair Holdings tower glistened in the morning sunlight as I marched through the revolving doors. 3 weeks had passed since my engagement party, 3 weeks of careful observation, strategizing, and rebuilding my knowledge of the company's inner workings. The security guard behind the desk straightened when he saw me. "Miss Sinclair, we weren't expecting you today." "It's an impromptu visit," I replied, taking the visitor badge he hastily offered. The executive elevator whisked me to the 38th floor. Unlike my previous life where I'd rarely set foot in headquarters until after my father's schemes had been exposed, this time, I intended to stay ahead of the game. My father's assistant nearly dropped her coffee when I strode past her desk. "Miss Sinclair, your father is in meetings all day. I'm not here to see my father, Margaret. I need access to the financial archives." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Those require special clearance. I'm the daughter of the CEO and future wife of our merger partner. I believe that constitutes special clearance." I smiled thinly. "Unless you'd prefer I call my father and interrupt his meeting?" 5 minutes later, I sat in the glass-walled records room, surrounded by binders of quarterly reports. I requested specific files, ones I remembered containing discrepancies from my previous life. When Harold Winters, the CFO, found me there 2 hours later, his face flushed red with either anger or panic. "Miss Sinclair, what a surprise." He tugged at his tie. "Margaret mentioned you were reviewing financial records." I looked up from the spreadsheet I'd been annotating. "Just getting familiar with the family business, Mr. Winters. My father suggested I take more interest." His eyes flickered to my notes. "Did he now?" "I'm particularly interested in these offshore accounts." I tapped my pen against a column of numbers. "The routing patterns seem unnecessarily complex." Winter's face paled. "That's standard procedure for international holdings." "Is it standard procedure to route the same funds through 3 different shell companies before they reach their destination?" I kept my tone conversational, though my heart raced. "Or for the records to show discrepancies of several $1 million between quarters?" "There must be some misunderstanding." He reached for my notes. "These are complex matters." I pulled the papers away. "I'm sure they are, which is why I'd like a full explanation of these discrepancies by the end of the week." "That's not possible." "End of the week, Mr. Winters." I gathered my things and stood. Or should I take my concerns directly to the board? I'm sure they'd be fascinated by what I've found. He swallowed hard. "I'll look into it personally, Miss Sinclair." The satisfaction of watching him squirm lasted through my exit from the building. I hadn't confronted the financial irregularities until it was too late in my previous life. This time, I was sending clear messages, I was watching, and I was no longer the naive socialite they could manipulate. My driver held the car door open for me as I slid into the back seat. "Where to, miss?" "Home, please. I have some research to do." The rest of the afternoon passed in focused determination as I compiled everything I'd learned. By evening, my apartment was scattered with notes and timelines. Victoria had brought tea twice, her concerned glances increasing with each visit. "Miss Evelyn, you've barely eaten today," she said, setting down a sandwich plate. "Thank you, Victoria, but I'm not hungry." I jotted down another note about overseas transfers to more industries accounts. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "Dinner at my place tonight. 8 p.m. Car will pick you up at 7:30. D." I stared at the screen. In my previous life, I'd never seen Damien's personal residence until after our wedding. The invitation was unexpected and intriguing. Victoria noticed my expression. "Bad news, miss?" "No, just dinner plans." I glanced at the clock, nearly 6. "Could you help me select something appropriate?" An hour later, I studied my reflection. I'd chosen a simple black dress, elegant but not overly formal. My hair fell in loose waves around my shoulders and my makeup was minimal. I wanted to appear confident, but not as though I'd made excessive effort. The car arrived precisely at 7:30. Through the tinted windows, I watched the city transform from the glamorous Upper East Side to the sleek Midtown skyline. We stopped at a discreet building with an understated entrance and a vigilant doorman. The private elevator opened directly into Damien's penthouse. As the doors slid apart, I stepped into a space that defied my expectations. The apartment was indeed minimalist, with clean lines and monochromatic furnishings, but it wasn't cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Central Park spread below like an emerald tapestry against the city's concrete expanse. Most surprising was the smell: garlic, herbs, and the unmistakable aroma of a home-cooked meal. "Just a moment," Damien's voice called from around the corner. I moved through the living area, noting the careful selection of art, abstract pieces that somehow conveyed movement and energy despite their simplicity. A single photograph sat on an otherwise empty shelf. A woman with Damien's eyes and jawline smiling from a garden setting. "My aunt," Damien said, appearing in the doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, looking decidedly less intimidating than the ruthless businessman the world knew. "I didn't know you cooked," I said, watching him wipe his hands on a dish towel. "There's a lot you don't know about me." He gestured toward the open kitchen. "I thought we should actually get to know each other this time." The phrasing caught my attention. This time, as if he too was aware of some previous iteration of our relationship. "Wine?" he offered, already reaching for 2 glasses. "Please." I took the seat at the island counter he indicated, watching him move efficiently around the kitchen. This wasn't what I expected. My fearsome reputation doesn't allow for domestic skills. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he poured a rich red wine. "The world sees Damien Blackwell as a shark in a boardroom, not a chef in the kitchen. The world sees what I allow it to see." He returned to stirring something that smelled divine. "Just as the world sees Evelyn Sinclair as a society princess, not the woman who just terrorized her father's CFO today." I nearly choked on my wine. "You heard about that? Harold Winters called an emergency meeting with your father an hour after you left." Damien's dark eyes met mine. He was quite distressed about your sudden interest in offshore accounts. "Should I apologize for taking an interest in my family's business?" "On the contrary." Damien plated 2 servings of what appeared to be risotto. "I find your initiative refreshing." We moved to a glass dining table overlooking the city lights. The risotto was perfect, creamy with hints of white wine and parmesan. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" I asked. "Italy. I spent a year there after college." He refilled our glasses. "My father thought I needed culture before taking over the family business. I thought I needed space from his expectations." "And did you find it?" "Space? Yes. Freedom from expectations, never." He studied me. "We have that in common, I think." The conversation flowed more easily than I expected. This Damien was different, more complex, more human than the calculated businessman I'd married in my previous life. Over dessert, a simple but perfect panna cotta, I decided to test him. "Tell me about the merger," I said casually. "Your understanding of it." Damien's expression shifted subtly. "Officially, It's a strategic alliance combining Sinclair's historical market presence with Blackwell's technological innovations. He paused. Unofficially, it's considerably more complicated. How so? Your father approached me 6 months ago with the proposal, suggesting the union would benefit both companies equally. His fingers tapped lightly against his wine glass. But the Blackwell legal team discovered concerning irregularities in Sinclair Holdings' recent financials. Yet you agreed to the merger anyway? I agreed to an engagement. His gaze was penetrating, which buys time to understand exactly what your father might be hiding. This wasn't what my father had told me in either timeline. Richard had claimed the Blackwells were desperate for the Sinclair name and connections, that they were the ones hiding financial troubles. You don't trust my father. It wasn't a question. Do you? Damien countered. Before I could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at it, frowning. I need to take this. Excuse me. While he stepped onto the terrace for his call, I found myself drawn to his home office, adjacent to the living room. Unlike the minimalist aesthetic of the rest of the apartment, this space was crowded with documents and multiple computer screens. A board on the wall connected photographs and notes with red string, an investigation in progress. On his desk sat a file folder with my name on it. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside were detailed reports spanning the past year, surveillance notes, threat assessments, and photographs of me at various events and locations. Most disturbing were the transcripts of intercepted communications mentioning me as a leverage point and collateral. Finding anything interesting? Damien's voice came from the doorway. I didn't startle or apologize for snooping. You've been investigating me. Not investigating, protecting. He entered the room, taking the file from my hands. These are security reports. Security from what? From whom, actually? He opened a drawer and pulled out additional files. Your father has made enemies, Evelyn. Dangerous ones. People who might see his daughter as a way to hurt him. He spread photographs across the desk. Men I didn't recognize. Locations I'd visited. Timestamps from months before our engagement was announced. There was a kidnapping plot last December. He pointed to a surveillance photo of 2 men watching me leave a charity gala, and a more sophisticated attempt in February that would have made your disappearance look like an accident. My mind reeled. In my previous life, I'd known nothing of these threats. Why would you protect me? We weren't even engaged then. Because despite what the world thinks of me, I don't allow innocent people to become casualties of business rivalries. His jaw tightened, especially when I suspect those rivalries might involve criminal activities. You think my father? I think there's more to Richard Sinclair than meets the eye. He closed the files. Just as there's more to you than I initially believed. The remainder of the evening passed in careful conversation, each of us revealing selected pieces of information while clearly withholding others. By the time I left his apartment, I had more questions than answers, but one certainty. Damien Blackwell was not the villain of this story. The car dropped me at my building shortly after 11. My apartment felt cold and empty after the surprising warmth of Damien's penthouse. I kicked off my heels and headed straight for my bedroom safe, where I'd hidden my mother's journal. For weeks I'd been trying different combinations, hoping to crack the simple lock without damaging the journal itself. Tonight, exhausted but mind-racing, I tried a new approach. My mother's favorite opera, converted to numbers. The lock clicked open. My hands trembled as I carefully turned the pages. Eleanor Sinclair's elegant handwriting filled each one, detailing her growing suspicions about my father's business dealings with Gregory Moore. The entries became increasingly urgent over time, describing missing funds, falsified documents, and offshore accounts. Exactly the issues I'd confronted Winters about today. The final entry, dated 1 week before her death, made my blood run cold. If anything happens to me, the proof is in the summer house safe. Richard must never know I found out about the Blackwell conspiracy. They're planning to use Evelyn. God forgive me if I can't stop them in time. I closed the journal, horror washing over me. All this time, in both timelines, I'd believed the Blackwells were the threat my father was protecting me from. But my mother's words suggested the opposite. The Blackwell conspiracy wasn't a plot by the Blackwells. It was a conspiracy against them, and somehow, I was meant to be part of it. I barely slept after reading my mother's final journal entry. Her words haunted me through the night. They're planning to use Evelyn. The conspiracy wasn't what I'd thought. My father wasn't protecting me from the Blackwells. He was using me against them. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. The summer house safe. My mother had left proof there, evidence that could expose everything. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, items I rarely wore in my previous life, but perfect for what lay ahead. Victoria knocked as I was pulling my hair into a ponytail. "Miss Evelyn, your father called. He's looking for you." My stomach tightened. "Tell him I went shopping if he calls again." Should I have the car brought around? No, I'll take the Audi. The keys were already in my pocket. The drive to the Hamptons took nearly 2 hours, giving me too much time to think. Wind whipped through the partially open window as I tried to piece together what I knew. My father and Gregory Moore had orchestrated some kind of financial scheme. My mother discovered it. She died, and somehow I was meant to be their pawn. The Sinclair summer house sat at the end of a private drive, its white clapboard exterior unchanged since my childhood. Unlike the manor, which was maintained year-round, the summer house was only opened for the season in late May. It was early April now. The house would be empty. I parked behind the garage where the car wouldn't be visible from the road. The spare key remained where it always had, inside a false rock in the garden. Some things never changed, even across timelines. The door creaked open, revealing the shrouded furniture and dust-covered surfaces. The air smelled stale, undisturbed. I moved quickly through the main floor toward my father's study, where a portrait of my mother hung above the fireplace. The painting captured Eleanor Sinclair in her early 30s, seated in the garden of this very house. Her green eyes, identical to mine, seemed to follow me as I entered the room. "I'm here, Mom," I whispered. "I'm going to find what you left." I recalled a memory from when I was 12, walking into this room to find my mother quickly stepping away from this portrait, her face flushed. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. The painting was heavy but swung forward easily on concealed hinges. Behind it, just as I'd suspected, sat a wall safe. It looked outdated, unchanged in the 7 years since my mother's death. I stared at the combination dial, considering what code my mother would have used. I tried her birthday first, no luck. Then my father's, still nothing. On a hunch, I entered my own birthday. The lock clicked open, my throat tightened. She'd used my birthday. Even in hiding evidence that might someday save my life, she'd thought of me. Inside the safe lay a USB drive and a manila envelope. I opened the envelope first, sliding out several glossy photographs. My blood ran cold. My father and Gregory Moore stood in what appeared to be a boathouse, looking down at something. No, someone, on the floor. The image was grainy but unmistakable. A woman's body, her face turned away from the camera, dark hair spilling across wooden planks. The timestamp in the corner, May 17th. 1 week before my mother's accidental drowning. My hands shook as I flipped to the next photo. A closer shot of the men, Gregory pointing emphatically while my father looked grim. The third showed them wrapping something in plastic. I dropped the photos, bile rising in my throat. My mother hadn't drowned accidentally. She'd been murdered, by my father and Celeste's father. I grabbed the USB drive and plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers. The drive contained dozens of documents, financial records, emails, contracts. I opened files at random, scanning their contents. One document caught my eye: Sinclair-Blackwell merger, Operation Clean Slate. I clicked it open, reading with growing horror. The contract outlined a plan to use the marriage between the Sinclair and Blackwell families as cover for transferring fraudulent accounts. My signature on these documents would essentially make the Blackwells responsible for crimes committed by the Sinclairs and Moores. The details were spelled out in clinical terms. The Sinclair-Moore partnership had embezzled billions through manipulated offshore accounts. With federal investigators closing in, they needed a scapegoat. Enter the Blackwells, a family with enough wealth and power to make convincing villains. I was the linchpin. My marriage to Damien would give them legal access to restructure both companies, creating a paper trail that would lead straight to him while clearing my father and Gregory. My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from Damien. "Where are you? Your father knows." My heart pounded against my ribs. How did my father know? How did Damien know that my father knew? Before I could respond, headlights swept across the study windows. A car was coming up the driveway. I peered through the curtains. A black Bentley, my father's car, followed by Gregory Moore's silver Mercedes. They were here. I shoved the USB drive into my pocket and grabbed the photographs, returning everything else to the safe. I closed it, swung the portrait back into place, and looked frantically for an escape route. Voices approached the front door, keys jangled in the lock. "We need to remove everything from the safe," my father's voice carried through the quiet house. Eleanor was always too clever for her own good. "And your daughter?" Gregory's voice. "What if she's already found it? Then we handle her the same way we handled Eleanor." My blood turned to ice. I slipped out of the study as the front door opened, ducking into the kitchen. The back door was my only option. I eased it open, wincing at the slight creak, and slipped outside. Car. I needed to get to my car. But it was on the other side of the house, in plain view of where they'd parked. I moved along the edge of the property, keeping to the shadows of the pine trees that lined the yard. Their voices carried from inside the house. They were in the study now. I could hear my father's rising anger when he discovered the safe already emptied. "Someone's been here!" he shouted. "Check the house!" I ran then, abandoning stealth for speed. My car keys jangled in my pocket as I sprinted toward the garage. A shout from behind told me I'd been spotted. "Evelyn!" my father's voice. "Stop right there!" I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as footsteps pounded behind me. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed out. Gregory stepped into my path, but I swerved around him, shifting into drive and speeding down the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I saw them rushing to their cars. I had minutes at most before they'd be following me. I couldn't go home. The manor wasn't safe. Neither was my apartment. Where could I go that my father wouldn't immediately check? Julian. The thought came suddenly. Despite my suspicions about him from my past life, the Julian of this timeline had been nothing but supportive. He'd been my confidant for years before his disappearance. His Brooklyn apartment would be the last place my father would look. I drove recklessly, taking back roads to avoid potential pursuit. Once on the highway toward the city, I weaved through traffic, constantly checking my mirrors. I called Julian with my car's Bluetooth. "Evie? This is a surprise." His voice sounded genuinely pleased. "Julian, I need help. Can I come to your place?" "I can't explain over the phone." A pause. "Of course. Are you in trouble?" "Yes. I'll explain when I get there. Text me your address." "Be careful, Evie." I hung up as my phone buzzed with another text from Damien. "Don't trust anyone. Wait for me." But how could I wait when my father and Gregory were potentially right behind me? I needed somewhere to hide, to think. I needed time to sort through what I'd found. Julian's address appeared on my phone. A converted warehouse in Williamsburg. I changed direction, heading for the Brooklyn Bridge. 2 hours later, I pulled up outside Julian's building, scanning the street for any sign of my father's Bentley or Gregory's Mercedes. Nothing. I'd made it. Julian buzzed me up immediately. When the elevator opened directly into his loft, he stood waiting, concern etched across his boyish features. "Evie, my God, you look terrible. What happened?" The loft was exactly what I'd expect from him. Artistic, filled with vintage furniture and canvas-covered walls. In any other circumstance, I'd have been curious to explore this space that reflected the friend I thought I'd known. "I found something at the summer house," I said, still catching my breath. "Documents, photos. Julian, I think my father murdered my mother." His eyes widened. That's a serious accusation." "I have proof." I pulled out the USB drive. "It's all here. Everything about the conspiracy with the Moores, the plan to frame the Blackwells. They were using me." Julian guided me to his sofa. "You need to calm down. Let me get you a drink." I sank into the cushions, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The adrenaline that had carried me here was waning, leaving me shaky. Julian returned with a glass of amber liquid. "Whiskey. You look like you need it." I took the glass gratefully. "Thank you for letting me come here. I didn't know where else to go." "You can always come to me, Evie. You know that." He sat beside me, his expression troubled. "You said something about the Moores? Celeste's family?" I nodded, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down. "Her father and mine have been working together for years. Embezzlement, fraud. They were going to pin it all on Damien after our marriage." "And you trust Damien? The man your father warned you about for years?" "I think my father's warnings were to keep me from trusting the one person who might expose them." The whiskey was strong, unusually strong. A strange warmth spread through my limbs. Julian took the glass from my loosening fingers. "Maybe you should lie down for a bit. You've had a shock." My vision blurred slightly. The room seemed to tilt. "Julian, I don't feel right." It's just the adrenaline crash, he said soothingly. But his voice had changed, the concern replaced by something calculating. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. That's when I realized my mistake. The whiskey. He'd put something in it. You're working with them, I slurred, fighting to stay conscious. Julian's expression hardened, the boyish charm vanishing like a mask being removed. He pulled the USB drive from my weakening grip. Your mother should have minded her business, he said coldly. And so should you. I fought against the darkness closing in around the edges of my vision. I'd been such a fool. Again, even with foreknowledge, I'd walked right into a trap. Why? I managed to ask. Money, of course. Your father made me a very generous offer to keep an eye on you. And when that didn't work, he shrugged. Well, accidents happen. I felt myself sliding sideways on the sofa, unable to stay upright. Julian watched impassively, making no move to help. A loud crash jolted through my fading consciousness. The door burst open, wood splintering around the lock. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Damien. Even through my blurred vision, I recognized him, his face contorted with rage. Get away from her, he growled. Something in his hand caught the light, a gun, pointed directly at Julian. Julian froze. Blackwell, this isn't what it looks like. I know exactly what this is. Damien's voice was deadly quiet. Step away from her now. The darkness pressed in more heavily. I fought to keep my eyes open, to see what would happen next. But the drug was too strong, pulling me under despite my resistance. The last thing I saw was Damien moving toward me, his expression shifting from rage to concern as Julian backed away with his hands raised. Then nothing but darkness. My head throbbed as consciousness slowly returned. The soft mattress beneath me felt unfamiliar, too firm to be my own bed. I blinked, trying to focus my vision as a sterile white ceiling came into view. An IV line snaked from my arm to a medical stand beside the bed. You're awake. Damien's deep voice sounded from nearby. I turned my head, wincing at the stiffness in my neck. Damien sat in a chair pulled close to the bedside, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and stubble covered his jaw. Where am I? My voice came out raspy. Blackwell Tower. Secure medical suite on the 40th floor. He reached for a glass of water on the nightstand and helped me take a few sips. How do you feel? Like I've been hit by a truck. I tried to sit up and Damien immediately adjusted the bed controls to help me. Julian drugged me. GHB in your drink. The doctor says you'll be fine, but it was a heavy dose. His jaw tightened. He was planning to make it look like an overdose. Memories flooded back. Julian's apartment, the whiskey, his cold expression as he admitted to working with my father. How did you find me? I had people watching Julian. When I couldn't reach you and saw your car outside his building, I knew something was wrong. Damien's hand rested near mine on the bed, not quite touching. I should have warned you about him sooner. I looked around the room. It resembled a high-end hotel suite more than a hospital room, with sleek furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing Manhattan's skyline. Security cameras were mounted in the corners, and I noticed a keypad by the door. How long have I been out? About 14 hours. It's morning now. I studied Damien's face, the concern in his eyes. You said you should have warned me about Julian. You knew he was involved? Damien stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. I've been investigating your father and Gregory Moore for 3 years now. 3 years? That's before we ever met. He turned to face me. Before our engagement was even conceived. Why? His expression darkened. Because I believe they murdered my uncle. And your mother. The room seemed to tilt again, though this time it wasn't from drugs. Your uncle? Alexander Blackwell, my father's brother and business partner. Damien returned to the chair beside my bed. He died in a boating accident 7 years ago. The same year as my mother. The pieces started clicking into place. Was it really an accident? No more than your mother's drowning was. Damien's voice was tight with controlled anger. Alexander discovered financial irregularities in joint ventures between Blackwell Industries, Sinclair Holdings, and Moore Enterprises. He started asking questions. 6 weeks later, he was dead. I reached for the water glass, needing something to do with my trembling hands. And my mother? From what I've pieced together, Eleanor found the same discrepancies Alexander did. She collected evidence, including photos that suggested Alexander's death wasn't an accident. The photos in the safe. My throat felt dry despite the water. I saw them. My father and Gregory Moore with a body. Damien nodded grimly. Your mother was methodical. She gathered evidence for months, hiding it where she thought it would be safe. But they found out. Yes, and they eliminated her the same way they eliminated Alexander, made it look like an accident. I stared at the city skyline, the morning sun reflecting off glass buildings. And our engagement? Was that part of your investigation too? Damien was quiet for a long moment. Initially, yes. I arranged it through business channels, making it seem like the merger was my idea when it was actually your father who'd been angling for it for years. The admission stung despite its logic. So you used me to get close to my father. I needed access. Your father's business practices became increasingly erratic after Eleanor died. Money disappearing, offshore accounts multiplying. Alexander suspected embezzlement on a massive scale. And I was your ticket in. At first, Damien leaned forward, his gaze intense. I had a file on you. Security reports, background. I expected the naive socialite your father had carefully crafted. But then what? You showed up at our engagement party in that red dress, completely different from the compliant daughter I'd researched. A hint of a smile touched his lips. You challenged me during our dance, started asking questions at your father's company. It didn't fit the profile. I remembered that night, how deliberately I'd chosen that crimson dress as my first act of rebellion in this second chance at life. I never expected to actually fall for you, Evelyn. His voice softened. It complicated everything. Something in his tone made me look up sharply. What aren't you telling me? Damien stood and retrieved a laptop from across the room. There's something you need to see. He opened it and pulled up a video file. This is security footage from Blackwell Industries, dated 5 years from now in what would have been your previous timeline. My heart raced. How do you know about my previous timeline? I don't, not exactly, but I have evidence of what happened to you. He turned the screen toward me. Watch. The footage showed a woman, me but older, entering a secure file room. I watched as my future self methodically searched through documents, occasionally taking photos with her phone. Then the door opened, and Julian and Celeste entered. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see myself backing away, looking shocked. Julian stepped forward, saying something that made future me shake my head vehemently. Then Celeste removed something from her purse, a syringe. Turn it off. My voice shook. Damien closed the laptop. 3 days after that footage was recorded, you were in the car accident that killed you in your previous life. The autopsy found traces of the same drug Julian gave you yesterday, which would have made you incapable of controlling the vehicle. They murdered me. The words felt surreal leaving my lips. Because I found something in those files. You found exactly what your mother had discovered years earlier. Proof of the embezzlement scheme linking your father and Gregory Moore. Damien's expression was grim. In your previous life, you started investigating too late. This time, you're ahead of the game. How did you get this footage? An anonymous source sent it to me 6 months ago, along with financial records dating 5 years into the future. Records that shouldn't exist yet. I stared at him in disbelief. You think I sent it? From the future? I think someone who cares about you found a way to warn me. His eyes held mine. The timing coincided with my deepening investigation into your father. It's why I agreed to the engagement when he proposed it through intermediaries. My head spun with implications. Someone from my future had sent evidence back to help me, us, in this timeline. We have enough to confront your father now, Damien said. Your mother's evidence from the summer house, combined with what I've gathered and what you found in the company files. He'll deny everything, not when he sees what we have. Damien's expression hardened. I've arranged a meeting at Sinclair Manor this afternoon. The federal investigators I've been working with will be standing by. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then I need to get ready. Are you sure you're up for this? The drug. I've waited 7 years for justice, Damien. In 2 lifetimes, I won't wait another day. The drive to Sinclair Manor felt like a journey into the past. Victoria opened the door, her eyes widening at the sight of Damien accompanying me. Miss Evelyn, we've been so worried. Your father said you'd gone to the Hamptons without telling anyone. Is he in his study? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yes, but he asked not to be disturbed. He's been on calls all morning with Mr. Moore. This won't wait, Victoria. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. Please stay in your quarters for the next few hours, no matter what you hear. Her eyes searched mine, and I saw understanding dawn in them. She'd been my mother's confidant for years. Perhaps she had suspected the truth all along. "Be careful, Miss Evelyn." She pressed something into my palm, a small key. "Your mother would be proud." My throat tightened as I recognized what she'd given me, the key to my mother's journal, which Victoria must have kept all these years. Damien and I walked toward the study, the familiar hallway feeling longer than ever before. We paused outside the heavy wooden door, and he looked at me questioningly. "Ready?" I nodded, then pushed the door open without knocking. My father sat behind his desk, phone to his ear. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face before transforming into manufactured relief. "Gregory, I'll call you back. My daughter has just returned." He hung up and stood. "Evelyn, where have you been? We've been frantic with worry after you disappeared from the summer house." "Save it, father." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "We need to talk." His gaze shifted to Damien, narrowing slightly. "Mr. Blackwell, I wasn't aware you were joining us today. This concerns him too." I closed the door behind us. My father's false smile faltered. "What's this about?" "It's about Alexander Blackwell," I said, watching his face carefully. "And my mother." All color drained from his face. For a moment, just a moment, his mask slipped completely, revealing shock and something close to fear. "I don't know what you're talking about." He recovered quickly, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "Why don't we sit and discuss whatever's bothering you?" "We found the photos, Richard," Damien said, his voice deadly calm. "The ones Eleanor hid in the summer house safe." My father's eyes darted to the door, calculating. "Photos can be misleading. Context is everything." "Stop lying." I placed my mother's journal on his desk. "We have her journal too, detailing everything she discovered about your embezzlement scheme with Gregory Moore. And financial records proving you've stolen billions through falsified offshore accounts," Damien added. "These are serious accusations." My father's voice hardened as he attempted to regain control. "Based on what? A dead woman's paranoid ramblings? Doctored photographs? You have nothing that would stand up in court." "We have Julian Hart," I countered, "who's currently in custody and very willing to reduce his sentence by testifying against you." This wasn't entirely true. Julian was under guard at a private facility, but my father didn't know that. His face contorted. "Julian would never." "He already has," Damien lied smoothly. "Signed his statement this morning." My father's shoulders sagged suddenly, the fight draining out of him. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the careful facade crumbling before my eyes. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." "What wasn't?" I pressed. "Any of it." He rubbed his face with one hand. "The money was just business, creative accounting. But then Alexander found discrepancies, started making threats about going to the authorities." "So you killed him," Damien said flatly. My father flinched. "It was Gregory's idea, make it look like an accident, just to buy time to fix the accounts." "And my mother?" My voice trembled despite my resolve. "Was that Gregory's idea too?" His eyes closed briefly. "Eleanor discovered everything. She found photos from the boathouse where Alexander died. She confronted me, threatened to take everything to the FBI. She was going to destroy everything I'd built. So you killed her too." The words hung in the air between us. "I never touched her." His eyes opened, haunted. "Gregory arranged it all, said it would look like an accident just like with Alexander, but you let it happen." My nails dug into my palms. "You let them murder my mother." "I didn't have a choice." His composure shattered completely. "Gregory had evidence that would implicate me in Alexander's death. He said if Eleanor went to the authorities, we'd both go down. It was her or us." Damien's face had turned to stone. "And the plan to frame me through the merger?" My father looked at him in surprise. "You knew about that? You arrogant fool," Damien said quietly. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate before agreeing to merge with your company?" "It was the perfect solution," my father said almost to himself. "The Blackwells take the fall for everything. Gregory and I walk away clean, and the money stays hidden offshore where the authorities can't touch it." "And I was just collateral damage," I said. "A pawn to be sacrificed." My father had the decency to look ashamed, if only briefly. "You were meant to be protected, Evelyn. The prenuptial agreement would have safeguarded your inheritance. While sending my husband to prison for your crimes," I felt sick. "Did you ever care about anyone but yourself?" Before he could answer, the study door opened. Two stern-faced men in suits entered, followed by several uniformed officers. "Richard Sinclair," one of the men said, flashing a badge. I'm Special Agent Roberts with the FBI. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and accessory to murder. My father stared at me, betrayal in his eyes as if he were the victim. One of the officers stepped forward with handcuffs. "This isn't over, Evelyn," my father said as they led him away. "Gregory won't go down without a fight." "He already has," Damien said. "Federal agents arrested him at his office 20 minutes ago. Celeste, too." I watched through the study window as they placed my father in a black SUV. The man who had raised me, who I had once adored, now revealed as a monster who had arranged my mother's murder and planned my destruction. "It's really over," I whispered. Damien stood beside me, his hand finding mine. "Justice for your mother, and for my uncle." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, press statements, and restructuring at Sinclair Holdings. Using my mother's evidence and Damien's guidance, I reclaimed control of the company, cleaning house of anyone connected to my father's schemes. The society pages exploded with the scandal, of course. Sinclair Moore criminal enterprise exposed, dominated headlines for days, followed by breathless coverage of the arrests. Photographers camped outside my apartment building, hoping to catch a quote or reaction shot. I surprised them, and myself, with my composure. In my previous life, I would have hidden from the publicity. This time, I held my head high, issuing clear statements about my commitment to restoring integrity to Sinclair Holdings. "Miss Sinclair, how does it feel to learn your father is a murderer?" a reporter shouted as I left the office one evening. I paused on the steps, facing the wall of cameras. "It feels like the truth, and truth, however painful, is always preferable to comfortable lies." The click of shutters punctuated my statement as I slid into the waiting car. 6 weeks after the arrests, I stood on the beach behind the Sinclair summer house, watching waves break against the shore. I'd had the house completely renovated, erasing the painful memories while preserving the spirit of the place my mother had loved. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and pinks. I'd come here to gather my thoughts before the preliminary hearing next week, where I would testify against my father and his conspirators. Footsteps sounded on the wooden steps leading down to the beach. I didn't need to turn to know it was Damien. "Victoria said I'd find you down here." He walked up beside me, hands in the pockets of his casual linen pants. Since the arrests, he'd relaxed his formal appearance slightly, at least in private. I wanted to watch the sunset. I kept my gaze on the horizon. My mother used to say this was where heaven touched the earth. "It's beautiful." His voice was soft. "The renovations look good." I needed to reclaim this place, make new memories to replace the old ones. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching seagulls dive into the waves. "The prosecution offered your father a deal today," Damien said finally. 20 years in exchange for testimony against Gregory Moore on the murder charges. Will he take it? "His lawyers are recommending it. Without his testimony, he's looking at life." I nodded, unsurprised. My father would always choose self-preservation. "You could have used all this to destroy my family too, you know," Damien said, looking at me carefully. "The evidence showed Blackwell Industries benefited from some of the fraudulent accounts, even if we weren't aware. You could have pulled us down in the scandal." "To what end? More destruction? More pain?" I shook my head. "Your family wasn't responsible. My father might have suspected something wasn't right. He chose not to look too closely. And he'll have to live with that. But some cycles of vengeance need to be broken." I turned to face him fully. "I've seen where endless retribution leads. I chose a different path this time." Damien took my hand, his thumb brushing over the engagement ring I still wore. In the aftermath of everything, neither of us had mentioned our engagement, letting it exist in a state of unspoken limbo. "We never talked about this," he said, touching the ring. "Whether you want to continue with the engagement now that its original purpose is gone." I looked down at the diamond, catching the sunset's glow. "When you arranged this engagement, you were seeking justice. When I agreed to it in this second life, I was seeking the same. And now I know justice alone isn't enough to build a future on." I met his gaze. "But I think we found something more important along the way." "And what's that?" His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "Trust, truth, the chance to choose our path rather than having it chosen for us." I intertwined my fingers with his. "In my previous life, I never knew the real you. This time, I do." Damien's free hand came up to touch my cheek gently. "And is the real me someone you could actually want to marry? Not for justice or business, but for ourselves? I think he might be. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks, maybe years. But I'd like the chance to find out properly this time. I'd like that too. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against mine. No more secrets, no more agendas, just us. We walked along the shore as darkness settled over the beach. In the distance, lights from nearby houses created a warm glow against the night sky. For the first time since waking up in this second chance at life, I felt truly at peace with my path forward. In this final chapter of my reborn life, I had chosen something stronger than revenge, the future I truly wanted. A future built on honesty and possibility, rather than the shadows of the past. As waves lapped at our feet, I realized that sometimes the most difficult journey isn't finding justice for what was lost. It's finding the courage to embrace what might still be found.